This is Conversations on Discipleship with Father Adam Streitenberger from St. Gabriel Catholic Radio and Diocese of Columbus Media.
Welcome to Conversations on Discipleship. I'm your host, Father Adam Streitenberger. With me today is Dr. Dan Ross. Dr. Dan, it's great to have you. I'm going to call you Dan. Is that all right?
That's perfectly fine.
Yeah. Let's start with a prayer in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we rejoice in all of your many gifts and how you have gently guided us and guided our lives. We just praise you for your plans that you have for us, and those plans that you have for us this day. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. So, Dan, we know each other not just through our Portsmouth connections, but through St. Matthew's connections, and even in your role as it was the president, wasn't it, of the Ohio Athletic?
Commissioner.
Yeah, commissioner. That's it. Yeah, through our connections at Newark Catholic and all of that, we have all these sort of ties that bind us. So it's so great to have you.
There's been a lot of tentacles in our lives.
Tentacles, that's... So, Dan, as we kind of start these series of conversations, I thought you might share with us your faith journey, which, raised, as I know you raised in a very good Catholic home. The faith always really has been the center of your life, and following the Lord has always been a part of your life. But maybe you could share with us how the Lord has guided your life.
Oh, I grew up on a farm just west of Portsmouth, Ohio. My father was Catholic. My mother was Catholic, but she was a convert. And I think sometimes converts have such a strong faith. And my dad was very, very strong Catholic, but my mother was an absolute fireball with Catholic. I mean, we did not miss Mass. And when you went to Mass, you were dressed, and everything had to be perfect if you were going to go to Mass. And we attended Mass every Sunday. I'm one of 11 children, and so we had one car, and so you packed into the station wagon, and even in the back end, and I would show up for Mass. But it was a wonderful experience growing up. We did the rosary around breakfast every morning, and when it got close to Christmas or whatever, when you were done eating, you didn't leave the table. There were stories of Christmas from the Bible. I mean, it was so my mom and dad were very faith-filled, and so I grew up in that kind of a home. And I think with 7 brothers, I think my mom and dad always wanted one of us to be a priest. So when I was in the 8th grade, I ended up in public school the first 3 grades, and then I went to Catholic elementary through grade 8. And in the 8th grade, when you take the test to go to high school, I must have done well, because I started getting letters from schools, and one of them was from St. Charles. I got a couple from places in New York, and they were saying, hey, we can give you a great education if you want to come here. And I would have gone to Portsmouth, Notre Dame, but we decided to go up and take a look at St. Charles. And with the faith-based piece that St. Charles offered, at that time it was a seminary. And so we decided I decided I would like to go, and my mom and dad said, we really can't afford that. So I worked at school as a custodian during the summer to help the custodian, get the school ready for the fall. And so that covered my tuition to go to St. Charles. And so I ended up 13 leaving home and living at St. Charles in the dorm. Got to go home Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter. And then you got home for the summer, because I had to do that because I had to work. But it was that was tough. You did your own laundry. I mean, they did the cooking for you, but it was a very, very strict life. A lot of prayers, a prayer life which it was much stricter than where I'd come from. And although I'd had a wonderful base with my mom and dad and in the Catholic elementary school that I had attended, but it was a wonderful part of my life that I wouldn't change. I know I was away from home, and I was away from all my friends and away from my family, and that was tough. but it was probably one of the best things I ever did.
So, what parish did you grow up in?
Well, when we lived on the farm in west of Portsmouth, it was Our Lady of Sorrows,
Okay.
which has just been closed. And then when we moved in, I was 10 years old when we moved in town, and that way it was much easier to go to the Catholic elementary school. We were a parishioner at St. Mary's, which I know was another tie-in where you were.
So at St. Charles, you were there for high school, the high school seminary portion.
Yes, sir.
And then you went into the college seminary. At that point, there was still a college seminary.
There was. I was there for 2 years.
Was there a real discernment of the priesthood? You know, your parents wanted you, they wanted one of their boys probably to be a priest.
They did.
But even like the choice to go even into the high school seminary, was there a discernment like the priesthood is a real possibility for me?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think of some of the priests that I had around me in Portsmouth, Monsignor Howard, Father Johnson, Father Burkhart, that I worked with all the time, and I served. Father Graff at Our Lady of Sorrows, Father Meyer at Our Lady of Sorrows, and I served Mass. I think I was 8 years old when I became a server, and because they didn't have a lot of servers, and so and then I served at the hospital. That was another wonderful thing that happened when we moved in town. We were about 4 blocks from the hospital, and they had Mass for the nuns and anyone who wanted to come, and it was at 6 o'clock in the morning. So we would either walk over or ride our bikes, my brothers and I, and we all served at the hospital, and then we did that and then had to come back and get to school. So, and we didn't live that close to St. Mary's because it was up by Green Lawn Cemetery in the north end of town. So, but it was a wonderful experience, and I wouldn't. Father Dunn, who was there, he just a marvelous priest, and I just been around so many marvelous priests that they were tremendous examples for me.
Then, so you started college at St. Charles, but you didn't end there. And what happened in that?
Well, at the end of our sophomore year, St. Charles as a seminary college closed. The college closed. And so it was kind of now if you really want to be in this, you're going to have to kind of do it on your own, because there was a program called the Scholastic Program for Ecclesiastical Students. It was a SPES program, of which there really wasn't a glue to it. There wasn't an organization to it. And so I think for many of us, it was kind of like, okay, you got to kind of fend. I ended up getting a baseball scholarship to Ohio Dominican. And I hadn't played baseball for a while, but I'd played all the way through till I got into college. But that's how I was able to go, because with 8 boys in the family and 3 girls, my mom and dad told us, if you're going to make it, you're going to make it on your own. There's no way in the world they could have afforded for all of us to go to college.
So at Ohio Dominican, you were there playing baseball and studying. What was your major there at Ohio Dominican?
Well, actually, it started in science.
Oh, okay.
And it was in the seminary. It was going to be a priest. Mm-hmm. So it was philosophy. I think it was philosophy is what you ended up with getting your BA in.
Yeah.
And I switched to science, and I took science my junior year, and at the end of my junior year realized that, I really love science, but I'm not exactly sure what I want to do with this. So I switched to education my senior year, and graduated on time. I had a lot of credits. I had more credits than I needed. But I finished in education, did my student teaching at St. Charles. And then after I graduated, realized that I'm going to try to go back home, because I'd been away from home for basically 8 years. And so I went back and I graduated on the early side and went down to Portsmouth Elementary, Catholic Elementary, and I finished the year as kind of a kindergarten teacher, second grade teacher for teachers who were out. Mm. So I taught kindergarten and then second grade, and then the next year I was employed as a 5th grade teacher. So I was a 5th grade teacher there, and then left and went to the vocational school as a history and government.
At what point, when you maybe in college, there was this realization that the Lord wasn't calling you to be a priest?
You know, when the college closed, in a lot of ways, we all felt rejected. I mean, I hate to say, I'm just trying to be truthful.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be critical because I don't know all the rationale behind the decisions that were made. And it's not for me to make that judgment. We just kind of felt like we got left out in the cold. That didn't make me feel like I didn't want to be a priest. I think I came to the discernment that there's an awful lot of ways to minister without being a minister. Mm-hmm. And my ministry ended up being kids. Mm-hmm. And so for the next 50 years, that's what all my jobs all entailed, working with kids. And I became very comfortable with that. I tried to be a deacon, but it was after, when I went to Avon Lake as their school superintendent, I made my parish priest, marvelous guy, Father O'Connor, and he was trying to work with the seminary, St. Charles Borromeo, I think it's on the east side of Cleveland. Yeah. But I was a school superintendent, and I just finished my doctorate. So it's like I'd had 6 years in the seminary, and they were still going to require every Saturday for 4 years that I had to go to class. And it was like, can't you give us any kind of a break at all for anything? And the answer was no. I mean,
yeah.
that was, the answer was no. And my Father O'Connor was just so upset because he had things that, and I would have loved to have done that. But the other side of the coin is I could probably made it 2 years, but I don't think there was any way my school board was going to let me for 4 years that you can't attend any of the Saturday activities at school.
Yeah.
I mean, it was such a conflict for me that I would have loved to have done that, but it just didn't fit. So I just figured it wasn't God's plan.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to end on is, the Lord reveals his providence oftentimes through doors that are shut. Things aren't possible. And that, that's not to say, a reason to be angry or upset. It is, no. We accept, that's part of the way that the Lord lets us know his will, is that some things just aren't possible.
I absolutely agree. It was like, okay, that's not what the plan is. And it isn't my plan, it was his plan.
So Dan, you had a wonderful career in education, and I think everyone who knows you knows your great heart for youth and for children, for students, but I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about education, and first with your career. So you started, as you mentioned, after you graduated from Ohio Dominican, you started down in Portsmouth at Portsmouth Notre Dame.
Yes, in the elementary.
And teaching fifth graders was your first.
Was my first full time.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what? How long were you in Catholic education?
Well, I was in the Catholic education the first year.
Yeah.
I left and I went into the public school.
Okay.
And I was a history and government teacher for seniors. And you talk about culture shift, because it was kindergarten, second grade, fifth grade, and then go to seniors in high school.
Yeah.
That was a little bit of an adjustment. Plus that I was just a little over 20, and I had students that were 19. That was an adjustment too. But it was a wonderful experience. I ended up getting my master's degree at Xavier in guidance and counseling. So I taught for 3 years, and then I was a guidance counselor for high school kids, and probably the best guidance counseling job in Ohio, because we had about 1,000 students. There were 3 counselors. One of them wanted to work with the students that wanted to go on to college and go on to school of figuring accums and getting all the stuff out to colleges, and just loved doing that stuff. One of them loved to do the references for kids for jobs and colleges, and so they looked at me, and they were both older than me, probably by 20 years, and they both looked at me and said, "You got the kids." And it was like, oh my goodness, this is the best thing in the world. So I spent my entire day dealing with kids for the next 3 years.
Where was that at? Your first
Scioto County
counseling?
JVS.
Okay.
Just north of Portsmouth, between there and Lucasville.
To back up, as you went into education, were there any kind of principles in your heart that you started with? Maybe that you yourself had received through your own education, Catholic education and at St. Charles and at Ohio Dominican, that you kind of brought into your career?
I think probably the biggest thing for me was I thought that as an educator, so many times decisions are made, I believe, that were expedient for you or convenient for you or the school or the administration. And the last thought was how it affected kids. And I thought that the paradigm should have been turned around. I thought it's what's the most important thing for the child, and then how do we make that work versus what's the most important thing for all of us, teachers, administrators, or whatever. And lastly, then what kind of a down the hill effect that's going to have on the child that's involved. And I thought the paradigm was turned around. And so when I had the wonderful opportunity to work with 1,000 kids, and I knew every one of them by name, and I just always felt like I was going to treat the kids in my care like they were my own kids. I wasn't going to treat them any different than I would my own children. And so for me, that was my mantra for my whole career, that it was okay. When I worked with my school boards, it was okay, we have one primary reason when we get ready to make a decision, and the question is, what's best for kids? And if it violates that principle, then we're not doing it.
There's a particular love that teachers or counselors or even and administrators have for their students, and I don't know. Do you describe it as love for the kids you're working with?
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
It comes right straight from your heart. So many kids. I grew up. There were 11 of us. We were on a small farm. We didn't have much. I didn't know it. I was probably considered somebody looking from the outside. So they're those poor kids. Well, we probably were, but I didn't need to have anything else other than what I had. I had the love of my parents and the love of my siblings. And I think when you love people for what they bring versus who they are, or what they could do for you, or what they have done for you, I think that you have a completely different vision for what your life should be. You're not, we're in this to serve. And I think that I felt like I loved every kid that I had. Now, did I love everything that they did? No, but I think sometimes you got to help kids understand that you got to separate what they do from who they are. You love the child. You may not like what they do. And so, it was interesting. I'd get situations where I'd have kids in my office who were in trouble when I was a principal. And I'd put a chair in between us, and I'd talk to the chair. And they would look at me and go, "What are you doing that for?" And I would say, "Because I'm talking to the person that did what it is. I'm not talking to you. I love you. I don't like what that person just did." Mm. And they'd always say, "Oh my gosh, that you didn't really hold that against me." No, I never held that against you. I just think you need to learn that whatever this person did, whatever, is not appropriate.
And obviously in your educational experience, you've seen broken families too.
I have.
And maybe where the parents are completely absent from the life, and maybe even a single parent environment, or more and more as we're seeing grandparents are raising grandchildren, or even where, like the dysfunction of family. Like, how do you, but the other point too is as an educator, you're not there to replace the parent either.
No.
How do you kind of balance that?
Well, I think one of the things that you realize really quickly, like especially as a counselor, is when somebody puts that you're their escape hatch in a way, that, when you say you need to be having this conversation with your mom and dad, and they say, well, I can't talk to my mom and dad. Okay, so let's work on the communication piece of how you're going to be able to talk to your mom and dad, because all these things that you're just sharing with me, you need to share with them. So I can give you a real quick story that I learned this really early in my counseling career, that a young lady came in and she was crying, sitting there crying, and I knew it had to be something that was traumatic. And she said she was pregnant. And I said, well, you need to talk to your mom and dad. She said, I can't tell my dad that. She said, my dad will kill me. I said, no, your dad is not going to kill you. I said, well, I'll go with you to sit down to talk to your mom and dad. So she said, okay. She said, my dad's going to kill us. And I said, no, he's not going to kill you. He's not going to kill you. I said, I'll help you, because I'm a fairly good-sized person. Her dad was bigger than me. But anyhow, I went over to the house, and mom and dad were in kind of doing the dishes, and the young lady came to the door, and she let me in. And so she said, Dad and Mom, we need to talk. So we come in, sit down, and we're sitting on the young lady and I are sitting on the couch, and Dad's in a lazy boy, and Mother's in a straight back chair on this side. And I said, Mr. and Mrs. Blank, your daughter has something that she needs to share with you. And so the young lady said, Dad, I'm pregnant. He come flying out of that chair. He did. He come flying out of that chair, and he's like this, coming right through at me. He thought I was the father.
Yeah.
I learned really quickly, we need to handle this a different way. But if I hadn't been there, because she said he'll kill me. If he would have hit her, he would have knocked her right through the plate glass window.
Yeah.
But he wasn't rational at that point in time. He was so emotional.
Yeah.
But I'm standing there holding him, and he is shaking. And it was like, oh my goodness, I need to find so you're going to learn along the way that you can do what you can do to try to help the kids. But I was not going to do that anymore, other than when we got in, the announcement that I'm just here to help. I'm not involved. I didn't make that clear at the beginning, and I should have. But I was 22 years old too. So that was probably a great learning experience. But you have to have that feeling for kids, and kids are going to come from different spots, different places, different homes, and you just got to help them through that. But I think the other piece is you also need to help your staff, if you're an administrator, understand that you don't want to sit in a lounge and be a lounge lizard about a kid that's really, really struggling in your class when you have no clue what's going on at home. Mm. You have no clue what's that youngster's dealing with when they walk out of that door in the morning. Everybody thinks that, it's like, heaven behind that door. No, not always. Some of them are, but there's a lot of them that aren't.
And, that's a really good takeaway as we wrap up this part of our conversation is, that it's not just, like administrators or teachers to youth, but it's really our experience with everyone before us is, especially in the life of the family. There's so many secrets in families, and people go about a given day, and the stress or the anxiety that they're dealing with, or even like the sort of existential threat that they're living with, it does kind of help us to, I think, begin to look at people in a new way, with an empathy, with an openness, perhaps even anticipating that there may be all this baggage behind the scenes that we're unaware
I think if we always ask our question, to ourselves, why is that occurring? And it's just not going to occur naturally because it normally doesn't act like that. There has to be a reason behind that. So let's give them a break. Let's pray. I always used to say, let's pray for them.
Yeah.
That they get through whatever it is that they're dealing with, because they're dealing with something.
Yeah. So, Dan, we were talking about your time as a counselor, guidance counselor down in Scioto County. And I think just kind of following the arc of your career kind of helps us, kind of structure this conversation. But so after that, your stint at counseling, what happened?
Well, the end of my third year of being a guidance counselor, my next youngest brother, Pat, had just finished his master's degree and was trying to get a job in counseling. Well, he had an interview at Delaware County JVS to be a counselor. And at the time, he was working during the summer for a company called Didier Taylor. They're a German company that does ceramic engineering. And he had to sign a contract at the beginning of that summer because what they used educators a lot of times to come in during the summer to work to fill in for people on vacations. So when you signed your contract, you had to stay for the summer because they're going to schedule vacations in that period of time, and they had to have somebody fill that out. And there were repercussions if you left early because you're going to be leaving them holding the bag. So I had 2 weeks vacation. It comes and my brother asked, he said, hey, I have this interview and I got this job in Delaware, but I have to start August 1st. And it's 2 weeks before the end of his contract. So he said, hey, can you take my job for me this last 2 weeks? Can you use your vacation to do this for me? My wife went, I did. That's what a brother does. That's what your family does. And so at the end of the 2 weeks, and it was a great experience. I didn't know anything about ceramics, but I do know about dealing with people and working with people. So at the end of the 2 weeks, they offered me a job, and I told them I really wasn't interested in that job because I said I have the greatest job in the world, and this is probably the mercenary part, is that my wife and I were trying to buy a house, and your salary when you're beginning as a teacher is, especially back then, was minuscule. And so we would have had to save up an awful lot of more years before we would ever be able to buy our house. And she was pregnant with our second child. And so I went back to my superintendent, and they offered me a lot of money, a lot more than what I was making, and then we would have been able to buy a house. So I went back to my superintendent, and he said, you can't do that. You're the only one that knows all the kids. And I said, well, I'm trying to. I said, it was Tom Schulte, Brigadier General Tom Schulte, was my superintendent. And I said, Tom, we're trying to buy a house, and Chris is pregnant with our second child. And so he said, okay, but you got to stay 6 weeks until we get somebody that can come in here and because you're the only one who knows the kids. Mm. So I would get up in the morning and I went to work at school. And then after school, I drove to South Shore, Kentucky to the plant there. And then I worked till midnight. So I had 6 wonderful weeks of that. But with that, it was probably, I was given a division that wasn't doing really well. And I went and I spent, and I didn't know anything about ceramics, but I do know how to get people to work and enjoy working maybe. And so I took a yellow tablet and I went around and met with all 86 people who were my people and said, okay, what's holding you back from being the absolute very best at what you do? Whether it's a mix operator, a quality control engineer, a ceramic engineer that was working on certain mixes and mediums that they use. And so then I put the plan together. And when they met with me this was probably 6 weeks or 8 weeks after I was in there. And they said, okay, do it. So we ended up being really successful at the end of the year. But I think one of the things that probably helped me the most was that once they found out I was a school person, there's all these parents that I realized that there are nights that dog eats the homework. Mm. That the school's doing this to my kid. My kid's doing this in school. The teacher did this. My kids running into these kind of situations at school. What do? I should have just put a shingle on my office because I had lines of people that were parents with problems that wanted to talk. And I think for me, as coming then afterwards, being a principal and school superintendent for 25 years, the next 25 years after I left, was probably one of the most helpful things in the world because it gives you an unbelievably, completely different perspective of what a child's life is like and what mom and dad are really thinking at home and what mom and dad are thinking about what the school's doing and what the principal's doing and what the teachers are doing. And so it just absolutely opened a door for me that I would have never had the opportunity, and I didn't really ever want to do that job. But I think the good Lord gave it to him because it absolutely made a complete, total difference in how I was an administrator for a school. So the principalship at Portsmouth Notre Dame came open I'd been there just a little over a year, and the principalship came open, and people that were working with me turned my name in. I didn't go apply. They turned my name in to do this. So I started getting these feelers about, would you be interested in doing this? And I did have my principal certificate and I had my superintendent certificate. And so I went over and interviewed. You'd probably find this extremely fulfilling in the fact that there was 21 people on the school board. Yeah, and every one of them was to bring somebody to the interview. And the parish pastor from Holy Redeemer and St. Mary's were there. So there was 44 people in the interview. and I had a straight back chair and a little table next to me with a glass of water.
That's not an interview. That's a congressional hearing.
I was going to say, I thought it was the Spanish Inquisition. But we started about 10 o'clock. We ended at 5 till 10. And a day or so later, they called me and said, hey, we would like for you to be the principal. And so I turned my notice in at Didier Taylor, and they were not happy with me. But I had a great experience with them, and I know I could do well with them, but it wasn't where my heart was. I wanted to be back with kids, although I didn't make the effort to do that. That door opened, and it opened. I think the good Lord opened that door because it was like that's kind of out of the clear blue sky. That was not on my plan. It wasn't something I said, oh, this is something I'd really like to go do. Like, I don't think there's any job that I've ever had that I've ever said, this is something I want to go do. It was like, it just happened. It just opened up. And so when that does, you go through and you give it everything that you possibly have because you feel like you've been given a gift to be there.
And that I think a really good takeaway from this too, which is it's in all of our lives, is sometimes the Lord invites us to step back from what we're supposed to do and what He's calling us to do. One, so that we really know that it's what we're supposed to do and our heart's really in it. And we're hungry. Distance makes the heart grow fonder or something like that. Yeah, but I think the other perspective, which is it gives us a new perspective. Unlike that gift of being able to see it from the perspective of the parents and the issues, how they see education. I mean, that's so key because I think there is. I mean, in Catholic social teaching, we say that the parents are the primary educators of our children. And I think regardless of whether it's the Catholic school system or the public school system, or, we even think like in the government level, we can forget that, and I think we even see that like say in parish catechesis, we forget that the parents are the primary educators. We're there to help them to be the best parents they can be. And to have that valuable perspective, I think I think it goes to how, the Lord was preparing you for the rest of your career.
I believe that from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah.
Because there was no way in the world I would have ever, and if it wasn't for the 2-week spot you needed to fill, that door open, and it opened like this. Mm-hmm. And it was just it was amazing. I can't even enumerate all the lessons that I learned from from the people I work with. I learn more from them than they ever learned from me.
Yeah. Now, how long were you at Portsmouth Notre Dame?
3 years.
3 years.
At the end of the third year, I applied to go back to finish my PhD. I started at the University of Tennessee and was there for the first grading period, and they changed the focus of their program. Their program focus had been more of a practical PhD. I didn't want to write textbooks. That was not something I wanted to do. I wanted to get better at what I was going to be doing, working with schools and kids, and the program that I was in at the University of Tennessee did that. At the end of the first session that we were there, they changed that focus, and the focus was they brought somebody in to the chair of the department. It was a textbook person. So I decided real quickly, I knew I did not want to do that. So Bowling Green offered a program where working administrators, people who had been principals or superintendents, I don't know how many, they had 90 or some applicants, and they were going to take 3, that you would teach undergrads, and then you went to school at night to finish your PhD. And so I was blessed. I had the opportunity to do that and went to Bowling Green. I taught seniors, undergrad, and then when I finished my doctorate, I ended up teaching in the grad college. My first grad class was 8 doctoral students. I know the lowest IQ in the room was probably mine, but it was a bunch of very, very bright persons. But I'd even ask, I said, how about if you give me people that want to be principals and superintendents, of which I ended up teaching that at Bowling Green. I taught it at OU. I taught it at Baldwin Wallace and Ashland, and basically did work like that, helping with people that were in education.
Okay.
And we're going to pursue their degrees.
Well, so Dan, after your stint at Portsmouth Notre Dame as a principal, and you finished your PhD in education, you ended up at Seton, or at Pickerington. Was that the next step, or was there a?
There was another step. In between that. One last thing I'd like to just say real quick. It was about in the finishing up of the PhD. Is that we had 3 children at that time. We had one while we were at Bowling Green. We're in an apartment, so I needed to get finished. You got a wife and 4 children, and the salary was $8,000 a year. But they did cover your expenses for your PhD. So I mean, we needed to get. And my wife was a lab technician, and she could have worked, but we decided no, that we were gonna raise our children, and we wanted to have our values. But I would get home from class at 10 o'clock at night, and then I would have to prepare class the next morning, which was at 8. And then I had papers to write for classes every night. So Tuesdays and Fridays I stayed up all night. So that was the only way in the world that we could get finished, but I did get a chance. I finished in 21 months, and usually it's anywhere between 4 and 7 years. But it was like, I don't have time to do that. My wife will divorce me. We'll be out on the street with a bag or something like that. But she was a guardian angel because she was pregnant, and we didn't have word processing back then. You had to do it on a typewriter. And when you took your draft copies around to your doctoral committee, if they didn't like something on there and you had to clean it up, you can't go into the word processor and fix it. You got to retype the whole thing. And then you got to go run the copies off and send them back to all your committee again. So it's a long process, and she was the guardian angel to get me through that piece. So after we left, after I finished, and it was in early August, no, it was late July of 1983. I applied for a couple of superintendencies. One, I tried to go back to Portsmouth. I wanted to go back to Portsmouth. Portsmouth West was open. I applied at Patrick Henry Local, which is in Henry County, which is west of Bowling Green, Milton, Vermont. And I was employed at Patrick Henry. It was about I think I was jobless a week. And they called on Friday and offered me the job. And on Monday, I got one from Milton, Vermont and Portsmouth West. So I ended up with 3, but the first one that called, if you give them your word, that's what you do. So you said, no. I'm going here because that's what I told them I would do. Wonderful, wonderful community. Northwest Ohio, Dutch, German, Lutheran, Catholic communities. It was a consolidation. There were 3 communities that were there that I learned an awful lot about that. That when that school is that heart of that community, and the community really, really felt that they were robbed when they pulled the schools out. They did it in '66 when they did the consolidations, and they were really struggling getting levies passed because each community vowed that they were not going to pass it since they took their school away. And they built one right in the middle, and Patrick Henry ended up being in the middle of Deschler, Molina, and Hamler. And so kind of a funny story with that is, and one of the things that I've never experienced like that ever, or I ever thought about it, was the very first football game that I went to. The athletic administrator said, we have seats up here in front of the press box for the superintendent and his wife, and so we're sitting there, and it's there's a whole group of people in front of us that they're all talking a lot, fairly loudly, and they were upset because there was 8 cheerleaders, and they were kind of divided. They weren't divided the way that the parents thought that they needed to be divided. They thought that with the community that was the largest of the consolidation should have the most cheerleaders. That they ought to be divided. There was 8, and they said there should be 4 from here, 2 from here, and 2 from here, because we're the biggest. And so I made the mistake. I opened in my mouth when the lady turned around. She said, well, what do you think? I probably just should have said, I don't know anything about cheerleading. I was never a cheerleader. I don't know. No, I just said, well, don't you think the best thing to do is to put the 8 best kids out there? Well, that wasn't the right answer for that. So the second half, I was not up there, and I never, the rest of my 25 years as a principal and superintendent, I never spent another minute up in the stands because I stood down in the field.
Yeah.
I went down on the field. I wasn't going to listen to that piece and getting involved in those kind of things, but I would never thought of that. That's the way that you would have to do things in school, or basketball team should have so many because this community is bigger than this community. So for me, it was kind of a good lesson of maybe one of those things that you're getting buffeted from the outside with, but it really wasn't something that you should ever think about making a decision in that way. Mm-hmm. So it was great community. I was there 3 years, and I had a phone call from the Ohio School Boards Association, and they said we have and I was very, very fortunate because we passed some levies up there when I was there, and from Pickerington. I didn't know anybody at Patrick Henry. I get a phone call from the high school boards, and they asked me if I was interested in applying for this job, and it was in Pickerington. Pickerington at that time was just starting to grow. In fact, I think, and I went down and interviewed, and I was employed there. And I was there 11 years. I was at Patrick Henry 3 years. And I think the first month that I was there, we went up 250 kids. And so it was kind of a wonderful experience to watch a community grow. I mean, from if you go down there now and go down 256, it's like Sawmill Road. Mm-hmm. And there was one stoplight between 270 and Pickerington when I went there. Barns on the side of the road, silos, and now it's all just completely developed. But we went from about 3,000 kids to about 9,000 in the 11 years that I was there.
And then after Pickerington, it was up north.
Avon Lake.
Yeah.
I went to Avon Lake, which is right on Lake Erie. So I was really blessed. I was in Portsmouth. I could look out the window and see the hills of Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And I went to Avon Lake, and I could look out the window and see Lake Erie. So from literally one end of the state to the other, I had the opportunity to work. I was there almost 8 years in Avon Lake, and had an opportunity. And this was one, I guess, that was a dream job for a lot of people, but it's one that I never ever really thought about. When I was a school superintendent or principal, when the school day ended, if our kids were involved in an activity, I went. If it was golf, it was tennis, if it was girls volleyball or whatever it was going to be, I would go, because if for those kids, that sport was just as important as football and basketball, which get most of the attention, and rightfully so. They're revenue-driven sports, and so. But if somebody's not a football or a basketball player, and their thing is, and I didn't care whether it's music or drama or OMEA concerts for the choirs, you go and support them because that's their dream. Mm-hmm. That's what they dream about, and that's what's important to them. And so you give them 1,000% support. So over that 25-year period of going to all those events, that most of the people, when they see you, they would see you out somewhere doing that, people from other schools. So when the job for the Ohio High School Commissioner came open, and the former commissioner, Claire Mascaro, great guy. I knew Claire well because I refereed for a number of years, and I knew Claire well. But I was getting phone calls from people saying, you ought to apply for this job because it'd be perfect. You go to all the stuff and whatever anyhow. Well, I had not been on any OHSAA board. I had not been, in their chain of direction at all. So I did apply. I did put a letter in, and I got a series of questions, and it was their screen mechanism. Mm-hmm. And I think it was 10 questions, and I got that, and I sent it in. I don't know whether I even told Chris until after the second one. And I got the second set, and then they said, you've moved on to the next level. So then they said, you made it to the interview stage. And we're going to interview, I think, 7 people. And I don't know how many. A bunch applied. I don't know how many for sure. But I went down and interviewed, and they offered me the job. But I ended up being the very first person from outside the OHSAA ever to be the commissioner, because everybody else had kind of come through that chain of command. The great place, and I really, when they first told me I got it, I had told them I had to think about it, because I had a great job in Avon Lake. We had 5,000 kids. It was a little. I liked it because it was a little bit smaller than Pickerington, and I wasn't building buildings. Mm-hmm. Pickerington, I didn't go to school to be an architect and a fundraiser, and all I was doing was passing levies and building buildings, and that really wasn't what I had in my heart to do. So it's funny, when you go to Avon Lake, and I told them, I said, I'm not kind of burnt out building buildings. I just don't want to do that. I didn't go to school to do that. And they said, well, we're not growing because, the Lake Erie's on our north end unless they start filling in the lake. But it was crazy. We started growing to the south. And so I was there about 3 years, and the board said, hey, we would like so we got to do something with the high school. We got to do something with the middle school. We got to do something with all the elementary schools. So we ended up with another bond issue for the next 3 years. I'm the architect again, which it was okay, but it wasn't something in my heart I really wanted to do. But we had a great community there, great supportive kids, great kids. But I've been so blessed because I've had great kids everywhere I've ever been. Yeah, I think most kids are all fantastic. Are there some that just need some help and need some extra help? Yeah, but most of them are all good. I think they're most all good.
Yeah. So Dan, as we wrap up our series in this final one, so you were commissioner for the Ohio High School Athletic Association for how many years?
A little over 14.
14 years. And towards the end, it got a bit rough. Not so much the job, but a lot of health issues arose.
Yeah, I ended up with some struggles. I had diverticulitis, and I don't know whether I didn't even know what it was, but it's a pain in your colon, and so eventually the doctor said you need to go through surgery and get your section of your colon removed, and I did. I said, well, can't you just give me the antibiotics, and so when I feel it coming on, I can just take them. And he goes, no, because one of these is going to erupt, and it's going to erupt and blow a hole in your colon, and you're going to end up septic. And he said, and if that happens, I'm not sure we can save you. And I just looked at him and I said, well, whatever it is I need to do, let's do it. So he said, you need to have surgery. So I went in and had surgery. Surgery went marvelous. It went marvelous. I go into recovery and through a blood clot. And the blood clot got caught in my widowmaker. And so it blew up my heart. And so they spent a year trying to get my heart to kind of function better. And I was in heart failure. At the end of, it wasn't even a year, it was about 6 months, maybe 7 months. They ended up putting a heart pump in, an LVAD, which was an absolute, it saved my life, but it was probably one of the hardest things in the world to do because it's a pump that they put in that's going to pump for your heart. You have a cable that comes through your stomach, hooks onto a monitor, and then the monitor hooks onto batteries. So you carry this around. At night, you plug in the wall while your batteries are charging. It's a little different experience, but I was with I had an LVAD about 2.5 years, and then I got the call one morning that, in fact, my wife and I just finished the rosary, and we were going to go take a walk, and the phone rings, and they said, we have a heart for you. This was at the Cleveland Clinic, and so we went up, and the good Lord had picked out a wonderful heart. And so the heart transplant, in fact, it was a marvelous thing because I was in the hospital for a long, long time with my heart pump because you're intubated and it's not a fun experience. But with my heart transplant, I was out of the hospital in 8 days. And it was like, what a blessing. And everybody always said, well, aren't you scared to get a heart transplant? And I said, absolutely not. I'm not picking out the heart. Good Lord's got the heart picked out. He had it picked out before I was ever born. He knew what was going to happen with me and who I was going to get my heart from. But it was and it's been an absolute unbelievable blessing. But it's a lot of trials and a long journey in the middle of that. But I think all of those pieces go together to help you understand, and put your life in perspective. I think one of the things that I think I realized really, really quickly is for the past 40 out of the 50 years that I worked in the school with kids, the buck stopped on my desk. And in a lot of ways, when the buck stops on your desk, you think you're in control. Well, that taught me really quickly, I'm not in control. The good Lord's driving the bus, and I'm going to get in the back. And when he opens the door, and that's my place I'm supposed to get off, that's where I'm going to get off, and I'll go do whatever I'm supposed to do. But I learned really, really quickly that I was not in control, that every day's a gift. That operation that started all this, I left my office Tuesday morning, and the procedure was just 2 o'clock, 1:30, 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon. From Thursday on, I had my schedule booked. I was at getting ready to go into the state football playoffs and all of that, and I didn't wake up for days. That, you think we're going to get, it's fine. They said, we're going to keep you overnight and you'll be out tomorrow and you'll be back to work Thursday. That you learn really, really quickly that you better grab every day and massage it, because I think when you say every day's a gift, I think that it's a lot of times rolls off people's tongue, and it's kind of cliche. Oh yeah, every day's a gift. No, every day is a gift. And when I went in to get my transplant, I just, the pictures that they say, well, you look like you're getting ready to go to a party. And I said, well, I was given 735 extra days. If that didn't work, okay. I'm absolutely fine with that, because I'd already been given a wonderful gift, and now I've been given, it's now been 3 years. I just passed the 3-year mark with my new heart. And how in the world can you ever have a complaint? There are no complaints. We've been blessed, and I've been unbelievably blessed. So
In the experience too, there were a couple times where you were dead. I mean, 4 times.
Yes. I remember the paddles.
Yeah.
I remember the paddles set me right straight up on the table. And there were some experiences that I had during a couple of the times that were quite remarkable.
What, are you willing to share some of those with us?
Well, the part I'll share that
Yeah.
I think I'll share with you is I remember the paddles. And I remember the anesthesiologist hanging on to my arm, and he was screaming at me, "Hang with us, Dan. Stay with us, Dan. Stay with us, Dan." And then the next thing I remember, I'm walking down this unbelievably beautiful path. And the light was so bright that I couldn't look at it. It burnt my eyes. In fact, I almost got a happy over here, because when I even think about it, you have to turn your head this way. It was like the sunshine. The sun was right here. Now, if I looked down the path, I could see the light, but I wasn't looking in it. I couldn't look into the light. It burned my eyes to look into the light. And on the other side of the path was the most beautiful colors that you've ever seen. And I remember the colors that were coming this way, but when they blended in with the white light, they created colors that I don't know what to name them. I don't know what you'd call those new colors, because they're colors I've never seen before. But the most important thing probably that I'll share with you is there's no description in the English language. There's no word in the English language to describe the peace. Tranquility, serenity, peace do not hold a candle to that. I don't know how you describe that feeling. I've had a lot of people try to tell me what they thought that feeling then was, or what words you describe it, like absolute love, total love. And if that's what it is, then we can't even imagine how marvelous that is.
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful vision, that you had, and I think, I'm loath to try to, to try to help you kind of give words to its meaning.
Well, there's a bunch more.
Yeah.
But that's I think for today. That's
we hear about these sort of near-death experiences and things like that, which I think do have a great deal of value. And even as serene and peaceful and as beautiful and as intense, like in the brightness of the sun and of the beauty of these colors, it's got to be infinite times even more so. Like just to describe it, you got to multiply it by infinity, and that's really what's awaiting us.
It is.
And to just have a slight little glimpse and an even a finite, limited glimpse of it, and it's, I think one of the things I wanted to, that really has struck me in our conversations is, and I, having known you for, some time now, your love for really everyone, but I think especially your love for students and the youth. I think it's fitting. It's almost poetic and fitting that it's your heart that was replaced, and that this donation was there, because I really do think that you've led in your career. The Lord has led you by your heart, and it's really been by your heart that you've witnessed to the Lord, and all of these. I would say thousands and thousands of lives that you've touched upon as an educator, and that work, obviously the work's not done. The Lord's given you a new heart to love even more with that. And I look forward to seeing what the Lord's going to do with you. And
so do I.
I
pray for that every day.
As the path continues. So we just give thanks to the Lord. As we kind of wrap up again, thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if there's any sort of final thoughts that you'd like to share with us.
Well, we're all on a journey, and we've all been given a lot of gifts. And I think of one of the things that Elie Wiesel, and you probably read some of Elie Wiesel also, but one of the things that he said that when we get ready to meet our Maker, that the good Lord's not going to probably come there with a tablet and said, okay, how many times did you lie or how many times did you disobey? And he's going to probably look at us and say, I gave you a lot of gifts. How did you use those gifts to help everybody that you were around? How did you touch lives, others' lives, with the gifts that I gave you? And that's what he's going to ask you to account for. And I think that every day we have a chance to touch people's lives. Every day we have a chance to use those gifts in the most positive of ways. And that we ought to make sure that we do that, because when the accounting comes, we want to be able to say we did everything in our power to help other people as much as we could possibly do.
And thank you so much, Dan. You've been listening to Conversations on Discipleship. I'm your host, Father Adam Streitenberger. With me has been Dr. Dan Ross, the Emeritus Commissioner for the Ohio High School Athletic Association. Thank you so much, Dan. And until next time, peace and all good.
A Diocese of Columbus production in partnership with St. Gabriel Catholic Radio.